In this video, we are looking at solving 2 or 3-step linear equations. So above this, you guys have a do not space, and we're going to start looking at what an equation actually means. And an equation is a mathematical statement in which two expressions are equal. That's why we use an equation, because that tells us that both sides of the equation are equal. And a solution to the equation is a value that makes the equation true. So the value that makes the equation true is our solution. If it doesn't make it true, then it's not correct. We're going to get different numbers on each side of our equation. And to solve it, we have to isolate our variable. We know that a variable has been isolated when it is by itself on one side of the equal sign. So what that could look like, if we are solving for x, we could get x equals and then some number. If we were solving for m, we could have the number equals n. Okay, so our variable is by itself, and then there's an equal sign, and there's a number on the other side or something on the other side, but we're getting that variable by itself. To isolate a variable, we have to use inverse operations. Whenever we're using inverse operations, we are actually doing the opposite of what is being done. Okay, so like the inverse of going up is going down, and so forth. So in math, we have specific operations, and we're going to go ahead and scroll here. And so we have this table that we're going to fill out, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit so that it'll show up. And we're going to go through the different operations, what the inverse is, and then a quick example. So the operation of addition is when we have an addition symbol. Oops. Okay, so a plus sign. And the inverse of that is subtraction. Okay, so we're going to write subtraction in here. That's a minus sign. So in our example, we have x plus 4 equals 10. We want to get the variable by itself. So our variable is right here. What's next to it is a plus 4. To undo that addition, we have to use the inverse of addition, which is subtraction. So we're going to subtract 4 from this side. And to make sure that we keep it equal, we're going to subtract 4 from the other side as well. Okay, so on the other side of our equal sign, we're going to subtract 4 from both sides. That's how we know we're keeping the equation equal. If we have a plus 4 and then a minus 4, those will cancel out. Those will turn to 0. So we're going to cross that out. And then our answer is going to be x by itself here because the 4's went away. And then 10 minus 4 is 6. So x equals 6. Our next one is subtraction. So very similar to the addition one. So the inverse of subtraction is addition. They undo each other. So in our equation, we have m minus 8 equals negative 2. Again, our variable is right here. So we want to move that minus 8 or that negative 8. And because we're subtracting it from our variable, the opposite or the inverse is to add 8 to both sides. And we're adding it to both sides of our equal sign. Okay, so I drew a line through the equal sign, so I know I have to add 8 to the one side and 8 to the other side. Now we can figure out our answer. The m stays over here. This minus 8 and plus 8 cancel out because they were inverses of each other, equals, and then we have negative 2 plus 8, which is 6. Our next one is multiplication. The inverse of multiplication, we use a dot or a circle kind of like that. We also use parentheses for multiplication. We don't want to use the multiplication sign that you learned in elementary school that looks like that, because that looks like a variable. We're going to be doing a lot of things with the variable, so we use the dot. So the opposite of multiplication is division. And division can be seen a lot of different ways. We can use like a fraction bar or the division symbol. So in our equation, we have our variable right here. And if we look, it is next to that 3, and they're squished together, and there's nothing in between the 3 and the b. There's not a plus sign, there's not a minus sign, there's not a multiplication symbol, there's not a division symbol. But we know when things are squished together like that, it means multiplication. So right now the 3 is being multiplied by that b. So to undo that, we are going to divide both sides by 3. Okay, so we're going to draw a line through our equal sign. And to do that, we're going to do a little fraction bar. So divided by 3, and then divided by 3. What's going to happen is 3 divided by 3 is 1. So we're going to get 1b equals, and when we divide 20 by 3, we get a repeating decimal, 6.6, and we're going to round it to 6.67. Now, I don't necessarily need the 1 in front of our variable b. That just tells me I have one of them. But if I look at the m right above it, I only have one m there. So I can erase this one if I want to. Okay, I don't need that there. The next one and the almost last one, second to last one, is division. The inverse of division is multiplication. And multiplication, again, we use the dot. And in our equation, we have a variable on the top in the numerator of a fraction. Whenever we see a fraction, we want to think division. A fraction means division, so we want to get used to that. So to undo that division of 8, we are going to multiply by 8 on both sides. So I'm going to put a little dot here and an 8 out in front, and I'm going to put a dot here and an 8 out there. Okay, so 1 on each side, because again, I want to make sure the equation stays equal. And what's going to happen is these 8s are going to cancel. Okay, because if I'm dividing by 8 and then multiplying by 8, those are inverses, so they get rid of each other. So we're left with our variable p equals, and then 4 times 8, oops, that's a 3, is 32. And if we look at all of these so far, our variable is isolated. There is nothing with the variable. We have one variable equals a number. If you were solving an equation, and let's say you got 32 equals p, same thing. That's okay. So we're going to go and do the last one in our table here. This one is a little different that you might not know. So whenever we're squaring something, we are raising something to a power of 2. Okay, so it's a little 2 up in the corner. And if you look over here, you can see that. The inverse of taking the square of something is to take the square root. And the square root looks like this. It's a symbol in our calculator that we can just type. So for our equation over here, if I want to get this variable by itself, because right now it's not, it has that little 2 in the corner, I want to take the square root of both sides. What's going to happen is I'm going to get s by itself. I want to take the square root of 9. My calculator gives us an answer of positive 3. But our answer is actually positive or negative 3. And the reason being is that if we take a positive 3, we put it in parentheses and we square it, we get 9. If I take negative 3 and put it in parentheses and square it, I also get positive 9. Which means if we worked backwards into the inverse and took the square root of 9, I should get 2 answers. One is the positive version and one is the negative version. So we have to know when we're using our calculator that not only is the positive value the answer, but also the negative value. And we use this little symbol here, the plus or minus. You could also write it as s equals positive 3 and negative 3, but that just takes a little bit longer. So now we're going to do some examples. So we have a couple examples here. We want to determine what values of the variable make each of the equations true. So we're just solving for the equation. We're solving for the variable. So in this first one over here, our variable is x. And so I'm just going to circle it so I remember where it's at. And I want to get everything away from our variable. The first thing I want to start with is what is furthest. So my variable is on the left-hand side. So I'm going to look right here. The number that is furthest from x is that minus 10. Okay, I don't care about the 14 because that's on the other side of the equal sign right now. So I'm going to start with getting rid of that minus 10. So right now it's being subtracted. The inverse of subtraction is addition. So I'm going to add 10 here. And I'm also going to add 10 there. Remember, we have to do both on the same thing on each side. So I'm left with 4x because we did not do anything with that 4x, so that stays there. Those 10s are going to cancel out, so we leave that space blank, equals, and then 14 plus 10 is 24. Okay, if you want to rewrite it so that there's not a space, you can. You don't have to. So we have 4x equals 24. Now, we want to double check, is our variable isolated? It is not. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to get rid of this 4. And if we look, that 4 is squished with our variable. And when it's squished together, it means multiply. So to undo multiplication, we are going to divide by 4 on both sides. These 4s will go away. So x equals, and then 24 divided by 4 is 6. And that's our final answer because our variable is isolated. We do not have plus or minus 6 because we did not take the square root. It's just x equals positive 6. Our next example is the one right to the right. 4p squared equals 64. Okay, so my variable is on the left side again. It's right here. There's a couple things going on. I have the 4 out in front, and it's being squared. We always want to do the square root last. Okay, so let's write that in our notes. So we're going to do, so take square root last. Okay, and that's the square root symbol. So to start, we actually want to get rid of that 4. And that 4 is being squished with our variable, which means we have to divide. So we're going to divide both sides by 4. When we divide both sides by 4, we get p squared equals 16. 64 divided by 4 is 16. Now our variable is not quite by itself. It has that exponent, so we want to go ahead and take the square root of both sides. So square root of both sides. That gets rid of that exponent there. So we get p. When we take the square root of 16 in our calculator, it gives us a positive 4. However, we know that when we take the square root, we get the positive and the negative version. So we get plus or minus 4. And our variable is isolated, so that's our final answer. You guys can go ahead and try the U-try. And you can pause the video to do that. And I'll write the answer in a couple seconds. Okay, you should have tried it. So you should end up with, m equals 5 as your final answer for that one. For this one, we get w equals 40. If you did not get these answers and you're not sure where you went wrong, you need to ask a peer in the class if they can help you, or you need to come talk to one of us and get some help from us.